Hi, my name is Zelman Ainsworth. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I'm here with Michael Argyrou from Hickory. Michael started Hickory with his brother about 30 years ago out of his parents' garage, and now you're one of the top private builders here in Australia, developing everything from hotels, residential, commercial, retail, office, you name it, they've built it. Michael's going to talk to us what he's building and what his customers are planning to build for the future. And people with existing buildings, Michael's going to talk about what he's advising them to do to make sure their buildings remain relevant and productive. Thank you very much for tuning in for another episode. And Michael, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
The media is portraying as the end of CBDs in Australia. Hickory are building all sorts of projects throughout CBDs of Australia. What's your view?
Yeah, I certainly don't agree that it's the end of the CBD. It's just a temporary blip. The CBD is generally a hive of activity. There's a lot of office workers that are absolutely going to come back to work. One thing we have learnt about COVID and working from home is that nobody wants to work from home anymore. I think that's certainly what I'm hearing around the traps, and what my staff and myself have personally experienced is that we don't want to work from home. We want to be in the CBD. And the amenity that the CBD provides, particularly Melbourne CBD, is just second to none. You can't get that in the suburb or in a regional area or certainly at home. So certainly no end to the CBD. I could go on to say that offices, we're developing offices in the CBD of Melbourne.
Right now?
Right now.
You
Hickory.
personally?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. We propose to develop a couple of offices on King Street with some retail at the ground floor, and we have a view that offices need to be upgraded. Many of the office tenants that are currently in buildings in the CBD will move to new buildings, and that's why we are proposing to build new buildings in the CBD. And the reason for this is that new buildings offer a different proposition to old, tired, grey, boring, dull and dark buildings.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be lighter area, more connective to the occupants, more community focused, more of a ground plane, more amenity, better technology, better air quality, better service quality, better connectivity. And that, unfortunately can only be done in a new building or a retrofitted old building. So that's why we're undertaking that. We think there's going to be a big market for it.
So you're really putting your money where your mouth is,
yeah.
On the CBD.
Yep, absolutely. It's anti-cyclical or counter-cyclical. It's a little bit bold, but that's how we roll.
Right. And is it just Melbourne CBD that you believe in, or is it CBDs around the country?
Well, we bought a site also with our partner at Time and Place in Alexandria in Sydney, and we're speccing an office building there as well. Actually,
how big?
It's 16,000 metres.
Wow. We're now in your South Melbourne office building that you just delivered.
Yeah.
What have you learned through this project? Because this is a very unique building. Case in point, the statue behind me. What have you learned through the process of delivering this project, of what offices of the future look like?
Well, I think they're more focused about the individual and how the individual interacts with the rest of the people in the office community, and the whole building needs to be looked at as a community as opposed to individual floors, which are their own separate compartments. So, how do you create a community in this vertical office environment? And the retail has a fair bit to do with that. The retail, we've looked at the retail essentially here as a concession space. Which means that there's no rent essentially for the retailers who reside here, for most of them. And we even do the fit out, like the restaurant. We do the fit out and we charge them no rent, and we get a good restaurateur and we make it the best possible fit out that money can buy. And we make it a beautiful place for the residents to go and connect and eat and have great coffee. And we want to make sure that the retailer in there is super successful, and if they make way too much money, then that's fantastic. That's great. Retail is critically important as a linchpin to these communities that we're creating in office buildings. But there's a lot of other things. I mean, the tech's important, the technology and the digital infrastructure that we put in the buildings, and then how the people within the community interact with that digital infrastructure is important to think through and work through. And there's many problems, little problems that our teams have worked diligently sort of resolving, and that is they're not problems, they're essentially ways that we can interact genuinely with sophisticated technology but consume it. And that's what we've sort of worked really hard to unravel. The outdoor spaces, the green, the air quality. I mean, we're pumping twice the amount of fresh air in this building than most buildings do. It just makes you feel alert when you come to work, and people always comment when they walk into our building they actually feel good. I said, well, actually you're getting twice the amount of oxygen here than you would in most normal office buildings. I mean, that costs, all of these strategies, they're an investment, right? So they cost more money than a conventional building. But what I'm suggesting is that conventional buildings, the days of conventional buildings are over. Buildings need to be unconventional. They need to be more than what they were historically in order for office buildings to remain relevant.
So spending more money on tech, fresh air, design, using a lot of common areas, plus not charging retailers rent to get the best retail amenity, is that equaling more rent in your office or more value on your buildings? Where's the upside?
I think overall, we'll end up having happier tenants, happier communities, and it's a long view, right? So it's an asset that we propose to hold for quite some time. So we're taking a long view on this strategy, and initially it doesn't equal more rent. It doesn't equal anything. Actually, there's no benefit up front. But we believe that over a long period of time, the tenants who are here are going to want to renew, and we believe that the market rents will be above market, and we believe that we're going to set a trend and set a standard, and there'll be a return on our investment as a result.
Are you adapting the same philosophy to your building on King Street in the Melbourne CBD?
Yeah, we were, absolutely. So the architects and the agents come through here and we say, we're going to replicate this in the CBD, and they say, wow, if you do this, then we've got a game on our hand. We'll get tenants.
So with all this new tech and designs and fresh air, and that's great, what happens to the buildings that don't have those sort of
I think they'll be retrofitted.
So all B grade and C grade buildings in the CBD will be retrofitted into A grade?
Well, not all, but over a period of time, buildings have to be upgraded. I mean, it's ultimately becoming, it's physical obsolescence, right? So, their technology and their infrastructure is becoming obsolete very quickly, and buildings need to change to adapt with the changing environment.
Hickory does a lot of mixed-use developments with residential, commercial, hotels, and retail all under one roof.
Yep.
Where is that market headed, and what role is retail playing? Are you creating more retail space, less? How are the shops playing into these projects? Well,
firstly, I mean, much of Hickory's business is as a contractor, so not as a developer. And where we are a contractor, I would say we have very little say or no say in what happens with the retail and the mixed-use development. In a couple of occasions where, one specific occasion, we're building a building again with our partners Time and Place on Queensbridge Street. We're putting a mixed-use development there, a residential tower and a hotel with retail at the ground plane. Again, we're looking at the retail as a concession space, so we're not budgeting.
How much retail?
We have about 4 shops on the ground floor, so it's not a lot of retail. But in addition to that, we also have some co-working on upper levels and some other community facilities on other levels. We look at all of that as building infrastructure, as essentially as concession space that ties the building community together. So again, we'll put F&B operators in there, and we'll put various retailers in on the ground floor that we will target and identify as critical to creating that connectivity and that sense of community within the building, and we probably won't charge them rent or give them a very heavy discount on the rent because they add so much value to the overall building.
And what else are you seeing your customers do on mixed-use developments in relation to how the retail is delivered?
Well, I think for the most part, our customers have been struggling with leftover retail and wondering how to charge rent for it. So I think they're now starting to have conversations in the same way that I'm having them with you right now, that they need to they're rethinking retail as concession spaces and as critical infrastructure. So it's, I don't think I'm I don't think I'm new in this concept or thought or idea. It's pervasive, so it's everybody's thinking of it.
Mm. Now, in the same way office buildings are being retrofitted or being developed different to where they were being developed 20 years ago, what's happening in the shopping center scheme? Is Hickory quoting on jobs or seeing schemes or shopping centers being upgraded?
Look, we've been fortunate enough to do a few stages at Chadstone actually. So after a long history of a competitor doing Chadstone for 30 years, I think we're up to the fourth stage in a row now at Chadstone. So that's been exciting. And we're slowly dabbling in being invited to do some shopping centre work at the moment. So I can't say that Hickory's doing shopping centres on scale, because that would be untrue. But we're doing bits and pieces.
Say whatever you want. They're not Hickory's an unbelievable success story. What's the most rewarding part of your journey, and what were some of the challenges you had coming up, or the mistakes you made on the way up?
Well, I mean, the most rewarding piece is culture, right? It's always the culture. It's always the community that you create, and a business becomes its own creature, its own entity, its own unique identity. That makes us so proud. And it's, when you look at the people and you talk to the people and you walk around, we have 1,000 staff, and you go and see everybody, and they've been with you for 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, and they've made a life, by being part of and co-creating this business and this identity. They've helped create it themselves, and they feel as much a part of it as I feel, and they genuinely should feel that way, because they have, done their part to create it as much as I have. That gives me more joy than all of the buildings we've built, and all of the other accomplishments. So that's certainly the greatest joy, and it still fills me with joy today. In terms of challenges, I mean, we've been at it for 30 years now, right? We started out of my parents' garage in Templestowe. And when we were huge, we went from
look like this often?
When we were huge, we went from the garage to the rumpus room. I mean,
right.
that was big time, right?
What year was that?
That was in 91, 92. I was fresh out of uni, and it was a tough time. So a tough time in that, it was the recession we had to have, where I couldn't get a job, I was unemployable. I mean, who would employ me? And it was difficult. So we were on the tools, and we started to build a business from the ground up, because we had to. It was out of necessity. There was no vision or business plan. It was just get up every day and go to work and try and find sources of revenue. And if you had to do it in the middle of the night, you did it in the middle of the night. If you had to travel 100 kilometres to do it, then you travelled 100 kilometres, and there was nothing too small or nothing too big, and we just said yes to everything. That was the business plan, right? And eventually it morphed into what it is today, which is extraordinary. But most of the way through was a near-death experience. So, did we make mistakes? All the way. Do we still make mistakes? Absolutely. It's all a challenge. It's funny, I read, when I read successful people's autobiographies, and they describe how many times they've almost been broke, it just totally resonates with me. I just remember the first 20 years, I think we were almost always broke. It wasn't fun at the time.
Who gave you your first big break?
It's hard to actually single out an individual or a first big break. I sort of describe often our journey as a series of sort of step changes, and it's just gradual. You go up a couple of steps and you fall back one, and you go up a couple of other ones and you fall back a couple more, and then you go, oh, well, I'm not going to go that way anymore, it's too hard, you go another way. So, I mean, there were lots and lots of those events which occurred throughout our years.
What advice you wish you had 20 years ago when you were just starting out, knowing what you know today?
It's funny, because you're always surrounded by people who are giving you advice, and it's not that I didn't receive advice, it's just that I didn't listen to advice. And I'm sure I had lots and lots and lots of really, really sage advice by, really smart, and I did, really smart, experienced elders. But my brother and I chose to not listen to any of it and just go and make our own mistakes. So, which we did, unfortunately. But what saves us and saves people in their startups and their businesses is just to show up every day. And eventually you figure it out for yourself, right? And keep on knocking on that door and someone's going to open. So,
for anyone entering the property industry now or starting their own businesses on their own, what would you tell them today in 2021?
I think be bold and think bigger. There's a lot of small thinking, mediocre thinking nowadays. I think people need to take bigger risks and have bigger visions. The carbon economy is just such a huge frontier. We need to go to net zero carbon. There's a lot of really young, really smart young people that are coming through, entering the business community. I mean, this is a huge opportunity, a huge business opportunity for them. And Australia, is a developed country that fortunately can potentially innovate and invent a lot of zero carbon inventions that we can offer to the rest of the world. So there's some huge opportunities, but we just need to think big, and we really need to invest in innovation and creativity. So,
what's Hickory quoting on the most at the moment? What sort of assets?
It's interesting, actually. That's a good question, because for the first time in a very long time, it's probably our most diverse range of work that we're quoting on. So we're quoting on, rail projects, station projects, facades, apartment buildings, office buildings, hotel buildings. So it's actually quite a diverse, and retail as well. So it's more diverse today for us than it's ever been, which is good.
And if an owner comes to you with a B-grade office building in the CBD, a limited amount of money to spend on upgrading it, where would you suggest he starts?
Well, HVAC, mechanical systems is usually the first bit, and then there's the...
cosmetics?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do the cosmetics, but your mechanical system's pretty important. And then cosmetics, yeah, probably cosmetics.
And car parks in the CBD, what's your views on that? Would you buy a car park at the moment?
No.
What would you do if you owned a car park in the city right now?
Look at how to repurpose it.
Into what?
How it adds value to your building infrastructure above. How does...
just a car park.
Yeah, but how do you repurpose it into something else, right? So you can cut holes in car parks, you can create new spaces out of it, you can make it into a market, make it into something that engages your community above that you're servicing. So you need to be creative and bold, right?
Yeah.
But car parks will need to be repurposed, in my view.
Melbourne retail strips, do you have a position on that?
Well, as we get higher density around those retail strips, then they become much more interesting, and retail starts to work again. But at the moment, it's dying. It needs more density. It needs more development, and unfortunately, the councils are so protective, and the residents in some of the inner city suburbs are so protective of the way things are. They won't allow a lot of development, a lot more density around their retail strips, which unfortunately limits their growth and their opportunity to be viable. So